On July 15th, the New York Times ran an op-ed about Israel's war in Gaza titled, quote, "I'm a genocide scholar. I know genocide when I see it." This is far from an isolated incident, but is it true? Well, Sean Durns, senior research analyst at Camera, joins us now. So, Sean, you recently wrote an article for the Washington Times about this. Let's get right to it. Do you think Israel is committing a genocide in Gaza?
Thanks for having me, Raj. Categorically, no, I do not. And the facts are quite clear that Israel is not committing a genocide, no matter what the New York Times or other elements of the legacy media say. It's simply not true.
So can you expand on that? I mean, it seems like everyone from the BBC to Al Jazeera to the New York Times is piling onto this concept of genocide. Why do you say that that's not true?
Oh, well, one thing that is worth noting, Raj, is all these media outlets rely on Hamas for their casualty statistics. Hamas controls the health ministry, which puts out the casualty statistics. They have a clear incentive to inflate those statistics, and they have a long history of doing just that. So these allegations of genocide are based on claims and facts supplied by a U.S. designated terrorist group. And therein lies a huge issue because, of course, this affects policymakers. It affects the discourse about the war in Gaza. And it's slanderous and it's a lie. And as I note in my recent Washington Times op-ed, there's other things that it also is, to include anti-Semitic, intrinsically so.
So in your article, you said Hamas is employing a strategy of human sacrifice. Can you expand on that?
That's correct. And of course, I'm citing there Doug Feith, who's senior fellow at Hudson Institute and a former Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. It is innovative in the worst way. Previously, authoritarian regimes have had no issue with sacrificing their own people. This is, of course, something the Nazis did. It's something that Islamist terrorist groups have done before. But this is the core of Hamas's strategy, which is to sacrifice its own people. And they do so by using munitions and storing munitions and operatives near public dwellings, hospitals, schools, and other areas where there's going to be a lot of civilians around, because they want those civilians to die, because then they can use that to hammer against Israel and limit Israel's ability to defend itself.
So what about the accusation that Israel is starving the people of Gaza? That's been getting a lot of traction recently. Let me read you a headline from Al Jazeera from Tuesday, quote, "Gaza logs 15 new deaths from hunger, taking toll since Israel's war to 101. What do you think about the accusation that Israel is starving the people of Gaza? I mean, you see all of these photos of emaciated kids. It looks like Holocaust survivors. So people will have a hard time saying that it's not that. So how would you respond?
One thing I would note, and I think that needs to be said, is Al Jazeera, of course, is Qatari state media. And Qatar is one of the principal founders or funders, I should say, of Hamas. So Al Jazeera is, it should be noted, a very biased source. But that being said, it's not just Al Jazeera that are making these claims. The claims, again, do rely on Hamas casualty stats. There's no doubt that there is suffering in Gaza. But one thing that I should note is that you have Israel and you have GHF and other entities which are trying to get food into Gaza. And it's Hamas that is targeting these aid workers and that is preventing food from getting in, because they're trying to leverage it. Because, again, they want to weaponize their own people's suffering in their war against Israel.
People have a hard time not believing it's genocide when they see all of these images, when they're just constantly bombarded with photos and with videos and with perspectives on CNN, on BBC. Let's say someone here who is very passionate about what's happening in Gaza were to be watching this video. How would you respond to them where they are just absolutely certain, judging by everything that they're saying, that this is in fact a genocide?
Well, again, I would note that all casualty stats come from Hamas, a U.S. designated terrorist group that has been caught time and again inflating its statistics, and which I should note, according to the Gaza Health Ministry, which is run by Hamas, there are no combatants. So every single stat that comes from the Health Ministry, to include, which has been used to bolster these genocide claims, it has a terror group as its source. Now, there's no question that there's suffering and tremendous, what the images that are coming out of Gaza, some of them are undeniably tragic and awful. But is what we need to be clear on here, Raj, is who is responsible. It's not Israel. Israel's been trying to get aid into Gaza, and it's Hamas that's been weaponizing that aid, weaponizing its own people's suffering, because Hamas doesn't care about Gazans. They have one sole goal, and that's the destruction of the Jewish state and the mass genocide of Jews. And they're willing to sacrifice their own people to achieve that goal. And they've shown that time and again.
I think a point of confusion for a lot of people is the idea of what's happening with the aid. And I've had a few people on, but there's a lot of people that are just not clear as to what's happening, because they see these pictures of emaciated children, then they hear these statements from the GHF that says, the reason that there's all these people being killed at aid centers is because Hamas or whoever is shooting random people. Then obviously the other side claims that the IDF is shooting people at aid centers. Not that you're going to be the purveyor of all things with this very intensely complicated and controversial subject, but can you maybe shine a light as to what's happening with the aid?
So I'll do as best as I can. And you really struck at something that I think is also at the core of the issue here, which is that news coming out of Gaza is going to be intrinsically flawed because it's a war zone. And certainly in areas that are controlled by Hamas, they're not going to let reporters in that are going to report accurately, that aren't going to serve Hamas's narrative. So that is one thing that I think does need to be noted. GHF is correct. There's footage of Hamas shooting at Gazans that are trying to get aid. And it's also been known that Hamas is stealing the aid and misusing it and misappropriating it, which isn't surprising because this is what terrorist groups do.
Well, Sean, this is a very heated subject. I appreciate you coming on and giving your perspective. You wrote an article again for the Washington Times. Check it out. This is a very sensitive subject, but thank you for coming on and addressing it, my friend.
Of course. Thank you, Raj.